Great to be back here, man. Thanks for having me back on. Dante, it's obviously an alias, a moniker. Go by Dante 32, but as a Roman numeral, God on X, and I'm kind of into the kind of pretty good at the whole open source intelligence thing, which is how I ended up getting into everything from looking into jihadists to election integrity and yeah, great to be in great company today. These are Chris and Holly are two of the best in the game, and I've loved my um, relationship working with him, which has actually been for quite a long time. So thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, what's up, man?
Yeah. So my name is Chris Arsenal, and prior service, I've got a lot of experience way back when, old school stuff, Cold War stuff, and been programming and developing stuff for about 45 years. So I've seen the entire transition from a technical standpoint all the way through. And I've looked at all sorts of stuff with regarding to the election machines, the systems, and the networks that actually are provided and connecting together. And so I can give you all of the details on that. Plus, I've had some DoD development experience in some projects. So I understand the lingo and what is necessary for operations and technical details.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on today. Everybody, please reshare if you're on X, if you're on YouTube or Rumble, like and subscribe, please. And we're going to jump right into this. Holly's going to kind of go through some of the things she's seeing in Georgia and some of the bigger issues that she's going through, and then we'll kind of move on from there. But Holly, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. This is such an important topic, as you all know, and I'm just going to kind of go over like a 30,000-foot view as far as Georgia's concerned. Of course, everybody knows about the FBI rating, Fulton County, and some of those reasons behind that. Which we actually did just have an evidentiary hearing on Friday. I want to mention that we're still waiting on the judge's ruling. Fulton County is trying to get the ballots back. They definitely don't want us looking at them, but one thing that's important, I think, for people to understand is, we always talk about the machines. And of course, we hear a lot about, voter rolls as well. But when you think about Georgia and the systems itself, it's important to understand it's not just the machine components. It's not just the voter rolls. It is an entire, I think it was Chris that mentioned it earlier, it is an entire network of how this functions, how this operates. And so what has happened in Georgia is, we had all the mail-in ballots. And in order to be able to stuff the mail-in ballots, as we call it, or produce mail-in ballots, that's where, you have the voter rolls. And so the dirty voter rolls are what allow people to have that excess, those excess mail-in ballots and be able to use those and have them run through the machines. And so, yes, the machines do make errors, absolutely. But it's the components involved with them and then the back end software too. In 2020, Georgia had three separate counts, and all of them were different. None of them were the same. But all too often we hear them say, oh, well, the hand count matched the machine count. Well, technically it didn't. It was a force match. And so that's where the guys are going to get into a little bit more of like the technical details and understanding the entire network and apparatus, around this, because it's not just one piece or the other piece. It really is an entire system that they have built, and they've done an excellent job doing it too. And that's why we're in the fight, the fight that we're in, and to try to regain sovereign control of our elections, well, in our nation as well, so with that, I think that's kind of a good high level overview. I don't know if there was anything else y'all think I should touch on, but I know y'all got a lot of good technical information to go through as well.
Yeah, I mean, no, thanks for what you do for sure. And it's a very important topic, and it's one of those things that people don't want to actually talk about. They'd rather talk about some foreign country that like actually doesn't, it doesn't really matter all that much when we have a lot of problems here in the United States that we could be addressing and we could really put our focus to. So thank you for highlighting that. Dante, what do you think? We're going to go, you want me to pull up the Tim want to start from there or what?
Yeah, absolutely. The TIM 2004 document, again, going down to the highlighted pages. And that is on page 102 under Systems Division.
Right.
So for your audience, a little bit of background, a little bit of genesis here. This was a 2004 fiscal annual report, which was conducted by Telecom Italia, which is, again, as it says, just an Italian telecom company. So the narrative around Smartmatic voting is that they have always been like this Venezuelan company. It was this Venezuelan product which was created out of Venezuela, but in fact, they merely wrote the Vista software. And we're not going to get into like the total specifics of this, but this just kind of lends to the nuance of how they develop these machines. So Venezuela, if you look here in this document under Systems Division, it says, quote, in particular, in the gaming sector, an important contract was signed and completed in 2004 for the supply of about 25,000 terminals for operating the electronic voting system in Venezuela, end quote. So it was actually the Italians, specifically their subsidiary, Olivetti Technos, which we'll see in the next slide, which had actually created these machines for the Venezuelans. And this was for the 2004 election, which, as we know, kept Hugo Chavez in office. And we'll get a lot more into the weeds about the origins of Smartmatic. There seems to be a little bit of a conflict in narratives surrounding that, but we'll get all that cleared up today. So if we go to the next document here, to the actual graph, you'll kind of get an outline of who all was involved. And again, as I said before, Vista was the software. They have it kind of inverted over there. Smartmatic and Olivetti actually built the hardware. They actually used refurbished slot machines for gambling to create election systems.
Can't make this up.
No, sir, you cannot. So just to kind of dispel some of these myths, Smartmatic was not created. It's not a U.S. based company. There are a lot of people saying they were created out of Boca Raton because the founders at one point lived there. They had an office there. They were operating out of there, but and that they were created in 2000, or I've seen a myriad of dates. But if we go to the next slide. Within the sequence, we'll actually see. So this is actual documentation, translated documentation into English for your audience, which I actually found inside of Venezuelan court archives. And the great part about corrupt corporations, state-owned corporations, is believe it or not, they actually get sued a lot. So there is a lot of information within like the civil litigation realm around Smartmatic because they had gotten sued multiple times by former employees. As a matter of fact, Smartmatic is PNG in Venezuela now. They're persona non grata. They have been exiled from Venezuela even before the operation to take out Maduro. So we can see here they were actually created under a name Proyectos Penanet CA, and they were created on January 16th, 1997. So with that, and you see the different various names that they go off down here as well. And sometimes they will be referred to as Smartmatic. There will be an A between the S and the M. So just if you're doing research into Smartmatic, understand that sometimes the translations won't have exact transliterate corrections. So just a side note. But if we go into this next document, let's scroll down a little bit on that document. Let's scroll down here to page 3. I want to read something, and then we'll come back up here to the header. If you could, please, good sir. So, questions regarding Sequoia's corporate structure. Quote, recent detention of Sequoia's parent company, Smartmatic Corp, has resulted in both companies requesting a federal review of their ownership structures by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, which is an interagency committee chaired by the Secretary of the Treasury. Concerns have been raised that since Smartmatic Corp's principal owners are from Venezuela, and the company provided voting equipment for Venezuela's recent presidential election while partnering with a small Venezuelan company named Bizta. Bizta received a $200,000 loan from the Venezuelan government and, in return, held a 28% stake in Bizta. The nationality of Smartmatic Corp's principal owners and its associations with Vista has created worries that Smartmatic Corp has potential links to the Venezuelan government that could allow Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez's administration to influence elections in the United States conducted on Sequoia equipment. In response to such concerns, Smartmatic Corp and Sequoia requested CFIUS to review the company's ownership and business structures for an official finding that the Venezuelan government does not hold any control over Smartmatic Corp or Sequoia. At this time, nothing suggests that Sequoia or its voting systems have in any way been designed or operated to any influence from the Venezuelan government. Attached to this memorandum, please find information from Sequoia regarding this investigation. End quote. And subsequently, further on these lines, they actually found that there is, in fact, Venezuelan ownership, which was alluded to in here. Now, what's interesting about this memo, which you'll see at the end, kind of tries to say that, oh, there's nothing to see here, even though it turns out, in fact, there was, which will lead us into our next document. I would just like to go back up to the letterhead and keep in mind this is a memo. You'll see the date, October 31st of 2006, signed by the Honorable Gavin Newsom, Mayor of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the turntables.
Yep. And with this, you'll actually find that this actually became the impetus for a lawsuit between Dominion and Smartmatic eventually at one point as well. But just to show your audience how intertwined all these are, let's get into our next document, which actually comes from a bankruptcy judge. And this was in 2016. And if you go to the second page of that document, you'll see it says creditor. This is for SVS Holdings, which is Sequoia Voting Systems Incorporated. And this is their Chapter 7 and Chapter 11 bankruptcy from 2016, and Judge Howard Tallman presiding. For Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So you see it right there. Creditor, Smartmatic Corporation. Creditor, Dominion Voting Systems Corporation. They're of counsel, and these are considered creditors, and Sequoia Voting as the debtor. So this is just to kind of give you your audience an overview of just how integrated and intertwined these systems are from an administrative perspective. And Chris later on down the road will get into how they are integrated with other things a little
Right.
bit later on. So I think that is probably a good segue into the next section, just to give people kind of a historical context about Dominion voting, who we're going to be specifically referring to today. Goran Obradovic is the director of technology. He is the name on all the patents. If you go into Canada's patent system, you'll see he is the one, along with four others, who were basically the architects of this specific system. Matter of fact, you see the Maple Leaf reference in
Mhm.
Dominion voting systems. But as you could tell by his name and by this slide, which was presented in December of 2003, they are actually, in fact, Serbian. And they have a lot of Serbian connections. Goran Obradovic was a president of the Canadian Serbian Association in CANSI. So with that, I'll go ahead and land it, and we'll throw it off to pass the baton off to Chris.
All right. Yeah, Chris, kind of break this down. We'll go into the Dominion stuff. I do want real quick. So, just so everybody understands, what we just showed you is this isn't like an unnamed source from so on and so forth said this about this. That's what you see in reporting a lot today, especially from mainstream media, or Candace Owens. She's like, I got a text from this person who just said this. We pull, Dante in all of his scraping and what he does, pulled actual court documents that link all of these companies together, and then link them to the Venezuelan government, the Italian government, like all of these different things. So the significance of this is real, and it's documented and it's public information. So any of the stuff that you see in here, feel free to go look up, and that way you can educate yourself kind of on what's actually going on. So just wanted to kind of.
And I would like to. Yeah, and I would like to kind of piggyback on that. All these documents that you're saying specifically from here on out, these were produced by Dominion Voting. These are their own words. These all come from Dominion's own archives through various RFPs, whether it be in Canada, Serbia, or in the United States. This is what they are telling us publicly. So when people talk, when they say something, it's good for people to listen. So with that, Chris, take it away, man.
So the first thing you got to realize is that when Dante's talking about the entity relationships, right? I think of these as being sort of individuals. They're sort of, when I say combatants or people that might be involved, they're entities that are going to cause things to have an effect. They're going to be, active in their operations. So of course, when you look at elections, and especially when you look at the United States, you're talking about electing people that are going to be in charge of defense systems or offensive systems. So that's you have to think of that in a larger scope. That's the way that I look at these things, and I classify this when you thinking of threat modeling and data sensitivity. The name of the document, classification for information security risk analysis. They understand that these things are critical systems that they're going to be using for elections. But notice that this conference that they're having is being held in Serbia. So if you want to go down to, you're taking look at that. If you want to go down to the diagram that we talked about earlier, sort of the conclusions.
You want it from this one?
No, in the same document.
Right. All right.
There should be. There you go. You even take a look at the corner, right up in the upper right left-hand corner. Try to avoid Clausewitz syndrome. This guy is thinking about things in terms of, this is Goran Obradovich. Yeah, he's thinking about things from a military standpoint. He's thinking of things of overall classifications and threat analysis. That's what you have to take into account when you're looking at these things. You're dealing with adversary situations, and how do you authenticate things? When you go down, take a look at the waterfall model that you have going down here. Decompose the blocks, right? The colored blocks. Decompose application, DFD, and UML activity diagrams. Those are unified modeling languages, things like that. They're actually trying to understand what's happening. Identify and classify the information resources. Where are you getting this information from? What kind of threats can you do? This is a very common practice when we look at data structures and the way that systems work. And then you start ranking those threats in terms of probability or risk analysis. It's the same kind of process that you would do if you were inside a military command and control operation and you're feeding things in and you're doing adversary analysis. Same kind of situation, same kind of breakdowns. So if you're planning operations, you have to know what your potential impacts are going to be. And then once you understand what the threats are, only then can you take and say, oh, I can do this in response. Because what you're actually attempting to do is balance resources. You need to take and figure out, oh, if I have this possibility of an attack, you're not going to put a lot of resources on areas that aren't going to be vulnerable. You want to take and put resources where you need them. So they understand these systems, and you start looking at the firewalls and all the other things that they're going to be doing. And now I want you to flip that entirely on its head. What if you reverse this and now that becomes an avenue instead? That's the possibilities that we need to look at, because an enemy will always take something that you put in command and control for security purposes. In fact, this was just recently came up. Command and control systems, an application that was designed for internet security was literally exploited as a tool to break security. So you have to consider things in both ways. So that's kind of the mindset that you have to have as a hacker. You have to be both the white hat and a black hat. You have to know both sides. And if you don't do that, you got a problem. So maybe the next slide that we have. So here you have Obradovic, who's again the architecture, right? System architecture. He's looking at the big picture. When we talk about architecture for software and things like that, you have to take in consideration that it's a pattern, and that once you have that pattern, you're going to be able to apply that pattern multiple ways. The actual plans or actual blueprints are going to follow a pattern. And so when you see something, you can say, oh, this is slightly different here, but you have to consider, oh, that fits within this pattern. So notice that this is an election workflow automation. They want to automate elections. So let's start going down to the sort of the page 8. So here you have a picture, and this picture right here, when you look at this actually is your registration systems. So it says elector management. They're managing you as electors. They're managing your details. Take a look at this thing and you're going to find out it's networked. There's the internet, the GPRS, that's a radio system. That is effectively, at this point, all of your LTE technology. Notice that they're using tablets. Does that look familiar? You can actually look at this thing and go, oh, that's no ink poll pads or poll pads, right? And it says electronic poll books. So you're looking at these things and you say, oh, they have to have access to what? An elector database. They have to have the voter lists. All of these things have to be imported and integrated. In order for them to use them, they have to know who they are. And notice that you have keys, right? So identification, EINs, elector identification numbers. Something that just came out recently in Texas, Bear, Texas, was the EINs, the elector identification numbers, being sort of extended with floating point numbers. They actually had extensions to the numbers. They weren't unique. They weren't integers. So when you start seeing these things, you have to think of the whole picture. It's not just a component. It is the entire picture. So that gives you kind of a view here. I'm going to scroll down to the next one. I think it's number 14, page 14. So yes, there's a lot of details there, but you take a look at this and you're going to realize they're up at the upper left corner on that diagram. You'll see elector management client, and then you see through the internet. So this picture right here with elector management and all of that other stuff is going through the internet. If you're going to create a middleman, anywhere in that internet is a good place for a middleman. And notice that what you have there, it says Dominion Voting Help Desk, remote or local access. That's fascinating, because when you look at these things and you say there is when you talk about security, and you could go, okay, your compartmentalized information facilities, your SCIFs, right? Secret compartmentalized information facilities. When you look at these things, you're not going to let somebody in that you don't know, that is unauthorized. But if you consider that entire boundary of this thing to be a SCIF, we got some problems, because it's holes. There's holes all over the place. It's like doors everywhere. So these things, these ports and what's available and how things are guarded and protected, they're not there. And notice that this is Democracy Suite Elector Management. I'm looking down in the lower right-hand corner. That's their elector management, their Democracy Suite. So notice that it's a suite. It is a collection of tools. And when you deal with tools, individual tools, each one has their own particular purpose, right? So you got to look at things like that. And when you say, oh, can you add in another tool? Then you might realize, oh, if we make a tool for this purpose, it has a unique function, it has a unique capability, and we start saying, oh, okay, you wouldn't use if I needed to do a particular kind of fire mission or sort of rocketry or some sort of defense situation, I'm going to use the right tool for the job that's necessary. I'm not going to use too much. I'm not going to use too little. I want to have that capability that does exactly what I need when and where I need it, right? The find, fix, finish type of stuff. So that's the way I think about things when I look at um, the total processes and election systems. I think of them from sort of a military standpoint because they're doing the same thing. And then you have to ask the question, who are we actually electing? And we can go back to that term republic, right? We're not talking about a democracy here. We are talking about a republic. And we are the sovereigns. We are the electors. We are the ones in charge. And we are electing a commander in chief. So that commander in chief, this makes elections a military task. So that's kind of the way they have to think about things. And when I want to think about that in terms of what Dante said and found, you have people in a civil government and they are electing a commander in chief for military purposes as well as civil. So now take it from there for the next piece. Dante.
Yeah, no, and I would just like to highlight that going back to, the relationship of Georgia and, how all this kind of spiraled. In 2019, Kennesaw State was hacked, and with that, Georgia had to completely revamp. All their voter records were hacked, and with that, Georgia had to completely revamp all their voting infrastructure. How convenient, right before 2020. There were only two competitors within that RFP. One of those was, of course, Dominion Voting, and the other was Smartmatic. Dominion Voting ended up getting that contract and becoming the election supplier for the state of Georgia because of the very scenario Chris just alluded to, basically, with the vulnerabilities within these systems. That same vulnerability, which exposed, which was exposed in the Kennesaw State Act, Dominion voting is still very much susceptible to that same type of possibility. So I just wanted to kind of bring that in. But when you're looking at these systems, these different components, it's also good to look at the physical components, the hardware,
Right.
which is kind of the corpus of the network. The network's just this kind of you
Yeah.
know area blobby thing, out in the ether. But the hardware itself can also provide security issues as well, whether it be like, threat vectors to the supply chain, or as we're seeing now, that a lot of chips and different types of processors have been put into physical ICT structures and telecommunication structures within US hardware. So with Dominion voting, what I did immediately after 2020 was I said, okay, where are these components coming from? And one great way to be able to kind of streamline that information is to look at the bills of lading, which are key documentations of shipments. Everything is shipped has to have a bill of lading included into it. So I went and I scraped as many as I could for a very narrow window, and I was actually able to find quite a bit. And John Paulos, the CEO of Dominion Voting, even admitted that they source components from China.
Hmm.
But it's not just aesthetic components. It's actual hardware. It's like it's actual parts of the BMDs as well. And for context here too, we don't actually know if what they're listing in the cargo description is actually what's being sent. And
Right.
then and in this particular case, for some of these bills of lading, the language from a logistics standpoint is extremely vague, and we don't know what they're sending. But just look at this first one up here. This was a bill of lading, and they're labeled as going to McKinney, Texas, which is where Dominion Voting has their storage warehouse. As a matter of fact, Mark Cook famously went into one of Dominion Voting's warehouses, and on the shelves there was a box with Dominion Voting's logo on there, and it said "Made in China" underneath it. And this was admitted into many different lawsuits. Um, so again, you see on here, you see where's this coming from? New Taipei City, Taiwan. You look at the second one for Bill Lane McKinney. Again, Taiwan switching adapter. Why are they ordering switching adapters from China? Can't produce those for cheap in the U.S. Oh, but wait, it gets even better. Or I'm sorry, in that specific case, Taiwan. But again, this one, the third one, Vutech Limited from Hong Kong is another one. If we go down to McKinney 3.
Let me pull that up 1 second.
Okay.
All right, here you go.
Yeah. Again, cargo description, battery pack, Dominion Voting. They sent a whole 20-foot mill van container for a few battery packs. Come on.
Yeah.
So
we go down.
So
we've seen some of these, right? So let's look at one. I'm gonna jump us back just a little bit. All right, to this.
Yep.
So this kind of framework here, and then into this electoral management.
Right.
Let's give a so what? Like what do the people, what do American people need to understand about this without all the technical jargon? Because I'll get into the military talk, and then people will be like, I don't know anything that you just said. I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Well, I can
Let's
make
break
it
it
simple,
down.
quick, Chase. I can make it simple for you, right? Let's make it real simple. If you were in a combat situation and you had to pick up the enemy's weapons, if you had to pick up their ammunition, would you trust it?
No.
Okay, so you're going to have to take your weaponry from a trusted source, right? That you know is confident. We actually, during Vietnam, we actually took and seeded a bunch of bad rounds that would blow up things into the system. We dropped or they would drop them. They would actually put in things that would literally blow up. And that was to actually make it so that they did not trust their own weapons. They'd be reluctant to use their own weapons. So you got to start at the very basics and say, okay, are you working from a trusted source of origin? You don't want things blowing up on you. When you say, okay, where are these things coming from? If there's critical components being used in our entire election, where is the source? Where are they coming from? And can you trust them? And when you start looking at the complexity of the computers and things like that right now, nobody understands what these things do. There's no one that actually can see all the way down and say, I can find that trustworthy. Everybody that's even in the ICT, the information, computer, and technology area, telecoms area, they have they don't trust it. They don't trust any of these things. If you ask people, face to face, if your life was dependent upon somebody getting and hacking this, they'd say, no, I wouldn't do it. So why are we taking and electing a president? Why are we putting people in Congress that declare war and stuff like that by using equipment that we cannot trace in ourselves? So that's a huge problem there, right?
Right.
That's kind of the way that you have to think about these things. This thing has holes in it all over the place, everywhere we look. And it's not secure. There's no boundaries to these things. And then even if you do think that there's boundaries, then it's say, oh, okay, we think this is secure. This isn't a facility. This isn't a building. Well, that has internet connections, yeah. And you're going through that. How many ports are open? Oh, yeah, okay, we can do that. If you're saying, okay, if the network is secure, Well, here's a question. When you're working out in the field and you're going to authenticate something out in the field, you better be using codes that nobody else has access to, right? So
Right.
you have to think through all of the details and say, your entire network has to be completely secure. There's no way anybody can do this. I can tell you right now from, if you look down that little flow chart thing, there's nobody alive that can actually say these things are completely secure from one end to the other. And one
Right.
of the things that I looked at in pretty much heavy detail is when you deal with communications, there's always updates, there's always upgrades, right? If that's a vector or an avenue for a threat, if you can take and make an upgrade and change something out, like what Dante was talking about earlier, switching components and things like that, the network LAN cloud in this diagram here, if I have something inside there and it needs to be upgraded, did you authenticate that? So it's the same kind of thing. Your infrastructure, how things are built, how long they last, we go through this process. They're actually using equipment and things that have not been certified in a long time. And so they can't even guarantee that it has an end-to-end security and infrastructure capability that's been managed and authorized and secure. So they play games, they kind of do a show and tell, but it's never actually fully authenticated. And it's almost impossible to do that. And when you ask people, anybody that claims to be an expert about this stuff, when you go to the actual levels down to where let's talk about the reality of this and say your life depends upon this. If I find a vulnerability, are you willing to go, commit seppuku or something? You're going to throw yourself into a wood chipper or something. No. They were like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, so they won't even trust their own systems. So we have something in the industry that we call eating your own dog food. If you yourself wouldn't rely upon it, then you shouldn't be taking and advocating it for others. Does that make it simple enough? I mean, I'm trying to answer some questions here, but that's when we see this, when I see this, I don't trust anything in this thing.
Right.
And this
Okay,
is very
so
indicative. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's compare that to, so the for instance, the Army purchasing system, right? So especially anything that's technology in any way, anything that has chips in it, anything like that, it's supposed to be all American made, right? Because they're worried about those vulnerabilities and those things that they can't necessarily track. Why does the military have that in their contracting system, but we don't have it in our election system, or we don't have it in some of these other systems? So that's an important thing to talk about too, because we've had equipment that we were using that we had to immediately stop using because they found out that a component of a chip was made in China, right? And then they were like, oh, well, we can't use this entire system anymore because what if there's a backdoor built in? And I think that's kind of the same thought process we're having here, except for we're just ignoring it.
Yes. Operational command and control, right? So the question is, if you have something, are you really controlling it? And if you're controlling it during combat, then you have to be secure in all of the infrastructure, all of the controls that ensure that that's going to be the correct thing, that there hasn't been a man in the middle inserted somewhere in there. Because the man in the middle, anytime you have, and the famous thing there for the man in the middle stuff is everybody knows about the pager incidents with the Israelis, right? Kind of brilliant operation. They got the pagers. They freaked people out, sort of like what Dante was talking about. They created a situation where people weren't trusting their telecommunications, and so they gave them an opportunity to take and go in the middle. Man played the man in the middle, and then they provided the pagers with the explosive devices. So again, the same kind of thing. That was a quote upgrade that was not actually fully authenticated. And so the same kind of process applies here. It's command and control. And if you're going to do that with infrastructure that we're doing for elections, it's impossible to do that. So for me, the real takeaway from all of that, there's no way you're going to secure this stuff. They've done these things. The vulnerabilities exist. There is, no matter how, if you're using paper and pencil and you're having, votes on ballots, printed ballots, You still might have a possibility of fraudulent ballots, but you're not going to have a centralized command and control situation, and there's almost no opportunity to slip in bad ballots.
Right.
That's what you have to have, right? So
Yeah.
you have to do it in such a way. Go ahead.
So the most secure way for elections, which most people already know, is just, and it's one of these things. It's like it's so common sense. It's one of these things that a toddler, that just learned their colors would also understand, is that if we just did paper ballots and then we counted them the way we have been doing, we've done it for a long time before, right? Before these systems and these machines were created and all this other stuff. That's the most secure way to have an election. And no, nothing is 100%, right? You obviously could have someone who snuck in and did something, or whatever it is. But on a large scale, I think is what you're saying, on a bigger scale, that is the centralized kind of authority over that can't be corrupted. If you do paper ballots counting on site, go from there.
Right. And so when you look at the United States, actually it's composed of the states, right? So the United States of America is composed of the states, but that actually breaks down. You can do like what we consider a multi-tier, or when you're setting up areas of responsibility, right, for operations. These things break down. What made sort of Georgia unique is that it had dominion for every precinct in every county for the entire state. So that's when you look at the swing states and how they broke down their machine vulnerabilities and how they formed, and that you can shape the battle environment, if you will. Like what sort of exactly what Dante was saying is you shape the battle environment by creating the conditions. And then what does that do? It forces, like the Kennesaw stuff, it forces somebody to say, okay, here's the solution. If they're offering you the solution, are you checking in, authenticating the background of where they're coming from and what they're involved in? This whole process of authentication is far more detailed and takes a lot of time. So even if you're looking at saying we have a machine, you won't have the time to be able to authenticate all of the upgrades and everything else. So there's a lot of serious vulnerabilities. And I mean, you want to probably go on to the next piece of this. But when I see this stuff, it's just, there's just way too much for any individual to pick up and authenticate in a very short period of time. I would rather trust people that I know, that are in my precinct and my community, to go through an election, because I've seen them, I know them, I identify them, I say, oh, you have my back. Or even if they have an opinion that's different than mine, I'm okay because they're in my community. And then it becomes up to me to take, that's one of the beauties that we have in our republic, is being able to argue those things through in the First Amendment, right? So we discuss those things. And that's really the way it should work. But if we can't see things, if nobody has an idea of who actually is in the middle, then we're not in control. Whoever has the aspects of who has control becomes a question mark, right? So maybe we want to move on to the next piece.
Yeah. Dante, I'm gonna let you go for a second. I'm gonna pull up. I'm gonna throw in a little curveball here and bring up here in just a second some an article about anomalies from the 2020 election, but we'll pull that up in a second once I get it all loaded where I want it. Yeah, Dante,
Oh, absolutely.
You got anything to add for the rest of what we were just talking about?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, Chris put it very succinctly, and I think, the man in the middle, if they're able to, uh, you know, who's building it, and again, this is really what it all goes back to, and just to kind of bring it home, if you go on to some of those other bills of lading, it all comes from Vietnam, which is a or a communist country. Sorry, very much under the influential umbrella of China, and from China itself. Like they're actually in these bills of lading, these shipments coming from China. For instance, if you go to SF1, San Francisco 1 at the end. I mean, you'll see it right there. BMD printer transport. The voting booth generic privacy screen comes from Yanqing, China.
Talking about this one right here?
No. The bill of
bill.
lading. Yeah, you
vote?
just go to the very last one, the Bill of Lading SF1. There were multiple going to multiple different states that I found just within a very short period, included California and New Jersey as well as Texas. So
Here's
yeah,
the
precisely. Yeah, Well Fresh Company going to Mascot Metropolitan in San Francisco. Yanchun, China, Dominion Voting. The ICS BMD printer, which is the ballot marking device.
mm-hmm.
They produce the printer for the ballot marking device in China. There is another one on here. It just says 20 packages for one 40-foot mill van container. Let me find out which specifically one that is. Yeah. Okay. So if you go to Bill of Lading in J2,
Mm-hmm.
cargo description, 140-foot DC container, STC, 20 packages trailer. That's it. 20
Yeah.
packages.
20 packages of what? Right? Exactly.
Yeah, 20 packages of what from the communist country?
Yeah.
And from a logistics standpoint, this should just be a massive red flag for any type of traffic management or logistics manager coming in. So yeah, man, let's see what this article's about.
Okay, so I've referenced this before. I've actually used some of the diagrams from here. I'll show you real quick. So you see, I'm sure some of y'all have seen these, right? These massive jumps here that happen for Biden in the middle of the night.
The F curves.
Right. So all of these and in the states that they were involved in. Okay. I'll actually let me see if I can. I'll share this. Let me share this under the stream right now on X real quick, so that people can come look at this if they want to. But okay, so the executive summary of this quote. In the early hours of November 4th, 2020, Democratic candidate Joe Biden received several major vote spikes that substantially and decisively improved his electoral position in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. Much skepticism and uncertainty surrounds these vote spikes. Critics point to suspicious vote counting practices, extreme differences between the two major candidates' vote counts, and the timing of the vote updates, among other factors, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of some of these spikes. While data analysis cannot, on its own, demonstrate fraud or systemic issues, it can point to statistically anomalous cases that invite further scrutiny. Okay, so what of this? All right, this is kind of where I have people look on this this part. All right, so in particular, we were able to quantify the extent of compliance with this property and discover that of the 8,954 vote updates used in the analysis, these 4 decisive updates were the first, second, fourth, and seventh most anomalous updates in the entire data set. So we're talking about Michigan, November 4th, 2020, which shows 141,258 votes for Joe Biden and only 5,968 votes for Donald Trump. We go to Wisconsin, so that was 6:30 a.m. You go to Wisconsin at 3:42 a.m. Central Time, November 4th, 143,379 votes for Joe Biden and 25,163 votes for Donald Trump. Georgia, 136,155 to 29,115 for Donald Trump. And then Michigan, 54,497 and Joe Biden and 4,718 for Donald Trump. All right. So what's in the purpose of kind of looking at this from a data and statistical analysis standpoint is that you have what you can see. So even these spikes early on here, down early on the 3rd, right, November 3rd, going into the 4th, you have normal movements that move kind of with each other, right? So they all, like, even when there's a little bump there's a little bit bigger bump there for Biden down there at the bottom. There's still a bump for Trump as well. So that's an influx of ballots that they put in, and those ballots were likely just normal ballots with no other issues. But then you come over here to this late night one in Michigan, and you see this massive jump for Biden and no subsequent jump at all for Trump, right? So that's what we're talking about as an anomaly. Like there's an obvious kind of something's disconnected here. And why was that? Like how do 150,000 ballots and only 5,000 or 6,000 come in for the other candidate when essentially, the country is not divided that, and even if that county is a little more, a bluer county or whatever, or a red county, like you still are going to have some correlation. Not every single voter in that county is casting a vote for this one specific candidate. So have you guys seen this or went through any of this yet?
I am very familiar with this, and let's clarify something. So if we go back to the sense of what's the process that we're taking, right? Where the data set's showing up and when. What we're actually looking at here is election night reporting kind of thing, right? So we're not looking at certified, here's the ballot counts and everything else. We're looking at what came through a computer system. And so you got to remember that everything that we're looking at here was not generated from hand-based ballot counting, hand-based reporting, hand-based we get together and everybody agreed, this is this and that. This is coming through an entire process that's been all electronic all along. Mm-hmm. And so the question here that you have to have and ask about this is beginning to break what's called the law of large numbers. That when you're doing something, you say, no, I'm going to be adding something in. If you say, take a scale, right? If you're adding things to a scale, when you see those huge spikes coming up, that would actually throw things off. And that's not the way that things happen. You're not getting that kind of balance. Draws and I, early on, Draws Smith, who did a lot of analysis along with Jeff O'Donnell on some of these election night reporting anomalies that we see, what we call the F curves, kind of looked into something, because I'm in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island had something that happened with the election night reporting, and in that sort of what's called the Edison drops, these updates. What actually happened with that had to do with the fact that they did not they held off a lot of data that they said they counted during the day, and then they added it in late. So it wasn't necessarily a machine injection, but by the same token, you can't follow back and say, okay, what does this actually constitute? Where is this actually coming from? In other words, you couldn't point it specifically at the particular communities. So she had an understanding of things, but it was incomplete. And so when we talked and discussed that aspect of it from the election night reporting things, you found that right there statistically is impossible. You can't do that. It's putting things, if you take a look once the line jumps, it has resynchronized effectively. You're just doing this kind of reset. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was found with the Edison research stuff was the election night reporting. There was an Edison reset that occurred. And so that reset, think about what happened in 2020 is you had a number of different states literally shut down counting in the middle of the night. Right. That's never happened before. So we're not going to take and count anymore. Wait, what are you talking about? Everybody typically would go right through and say, okay, there is that. If the machines are supposed to make things quicker, that didn't do it. And to stop counting just gave them the quote reset. So yeah, I'm very familiar with this entire approach and everything. And it completely breaks the law of large numbers. And you start looking at and you say, well, what's the margin of difference? So without getting too complex about this, you have to look and consider that you have the percentages for winning in many different states are going to vary. And when I say that, in terms of the laws of the states, some allow a plurality, some require a majority, right? So these have to be established. And when I say that, in Rhode Island, we have a plurality. The winner gets the most votes. And so we actually had at one point a governor that was put in with 30% of the votes. Well, for us, that's what's in the state law, but that's a problem. And when I say that's a problem, take a look at it and think about that. Most of the state didn't vote for this person. So we have major issues like that show up. But again, when you start plotting this, You're looking at this from a data set standpoint, and how many people are comfortable with this? Again, from an expertise standpoint, this is not something simple. This starts getting more complex. And when you introduced more complexity into the system, and again, we can talk about command and control, who's in control here? Who really understands this? And the answer to that would be the people that are even running the elections don't understand this.
Right.
So how do you take and resolve that? There are those anomalies and they can show up. But again, it's a matter of this chart is summarizing a very large data set that's composed of the number of what, so you have n is equal 315, right? So you have a lot of data in this series that's being used, but very few people really understand the implications of this. They can look at it and it's not a reflection of anybody's intelligence. It's just there's a lot of data to consume, and unless you're involved in with this kind of analysis on a regular basis, it would be like saying, okay, are you a doctor? Do you understand what this MRI looks like, and things like that?
Right.
People don't always get it. It requires a particular level of expertise that has to be grown over time and with experience. So we see these things and they require an explanation, but it's far easier when you think about it to establish that quality of information, the authentication, and build incrementally. And again, this is because we have a series of, we get data in, think about ballot marking devices, sort of bringing it back to what we're talking about. You have ballot marking devices, you have counting devices, you have the various, so each piece of this, everything is merged into tables. Everything is merged, and then even then, when it's uploaded to say the state Secretary of State's office or something like that, you still have all of, where's the Secretary of State's office compute power? It's probably not there. It's probably on Amazon or somewhere else. And when I actually looked into this, Chase, it was literally your, between all of your registration points and everything else, Amazon Web Services could be anywhere in the world. If you really understand how Amazon's arranged,
Right.
they literally could have data sets anywhere in the world, and they do their load balancing so that they are not overblown by any kind of Christmas rush or demand when people are doing stuff. And the same thing's true for Google and others. They use a very widely distributed network to actually provide complete backup services. I have a lot of experience in this area in terms of operation because I worked for a lottery company, the world's largest lottery company, IGT. And backing up and making sure you had fully authenticated materials. Think about that Powerball and all that other stuff.
Right.
Those kinds of things, they make sure all the way down to the molecular level. When a lottery ticket is sold, they make sure before they do any kind of payout, they have full authentication down to every ticket, machine, everything else is locked down like crazy. In their supply process, they've seen it all. So they know what they're looking at here. And again, going back to what Dante had raised with the bill of lading, we can't authenticate all of these things. So every aspect of our elections has these holes in them. I say, not even holes, they're just, huge gateways. Just, you can drive a truck through the stuff. In many cases, that's how bad it is. It's just wide open.
Yeah, and that's not even to take into account the the issues with sidle voting, which is a ENR, like, it is a vote tally aggregator.
Right. Yeah. Both Seidel and Edison Research are sort of the companies that are doing the aggregation stuff, which I talked about. That's election night reporting for distribution of information. And when you consider looking at these things and you go, you can talk about, okay, I can take this database or do this. If no one has immediate access to these particular ballots with those particular markings, are they authentic? And even when you have, our elections being public, even when you have something, there's a whole process where you go on a day of election. On a day of election, you get to recognize people that are your legal peers. So when you go to vote, you go, okay, that person said they're so and so. That's not so and so. I grew up with that person. We literally had a ballot cast in my own hometown by a chief of police who had been dead. And so you get these kinds of things where you go, wait, what? And so there's all of these issues, they start coming up. The reason why we have local precincts and counts, and they're small, is so that you can identify everybody in your neighborhood. You have not only the commonality, you're voting on the same issues, right? But as a court of law, you're actually transferring 4 unique powers. So those 4 unique powers and the way they're transferred, they have to be authenticated all along. And the people that are missing, that are not present in the election, you have to have some way of saying, okay, they're working in the service of their country and things like that. I'm going to rely upon the agencies that are responsible. Like when you're in military in the field, and you know this, you go out in the field and you're during operations, you can't necessarily be casting a ballot. Well, okay, say fine. That I can accommodate those kinds of situations because you're already in that agency. You're an elector that is doing a job as someone under command and control. And then we go back to that. So some of the first problems that we had with elections, actually, in terms of massive election fraud, happened during the Civil War.
It's interesting. So what do you make of, like, for example, what I've shared here is another part of this article. You know, I mean, just the, like, and then they don't have Virginia highlighted, but Virginia at, you know, 11:42 push PM, you have 331,000 for Biden and then only 39,000 for Trump. And, you know, I mean, some of these, I know some of the excuses were that they didn't count, you know, they started pushing in the early votes, you know, around these times for whatever reason. Just kind of break from what you know about it and the way that the system works. Is there a plausible explanation for how this could have happened without fraud, or is this something that, and again, I'm not going to sit here and claim that there was 100% that there was fraud, right? Because, or on a fraud on a scale to where it would change the election. They've done a lot of court cases. Now, I think what we've seen with some of those court cases is that there's not a lot of precedent, you know, leading up to it. So there's not a lot of judges that would be comfortable making rulings on certain things, and a lot of different things factor into this. But just from a
venue shopping as well, and I'll go into some of the controversies around the judicial aspects of this after this.
Okay. Yeah, when you're bringing that up, I mean, think of what's going on here. If you're actually making my point that when judges have an issue with the election results, it's because, again, the complexity of what they're looking at, they don't fully comprehend. And to actually dig into that level of detail would require a massive amount of time. I've been looking into 2020 for you know, since the election, and it's been occupying a great amount of my time. And it's just, I still am learning more things about it. But from the machine standpoint, when you start looking at these things, is there a plausible, the question is plausibility, right? So you want a high degree of confidence. So the same thing that goes back, I'm going to go back to the little explanation that we had before. You have to have, when you're using your weaponry in war, in combat situations, you have to have a high degree of confidence. You're not going to have malfunctions, right? You're not going to have things that are going to be sort of like, you know, I'm secure that I can use this because nobody penetrated and infiltrated and set things up to work against me. So all of those confidence levels, that's the way our elections should work. That's not what we're seeing here. The fact that people even have a question about this stuff means that the process is already far broken.
Right.
And we can get into argument, it's like how many angels dance on the head of a pin, but it misses the greater point that the complexity of this is way beyond the average electorate, and the amount of time that it takes, it's just too much. So from a simplicity standpoint, I'd have more confidence in individuals that are, that I know that have my back, sort of like a unit or a team that have my back and know that, I know them. And even if they have differences of opinion, yes, I don't think we should, we're not displaying who we voted for and stuff, because secret ballot actually has a great purpose, and that is to prevent pressure from particular things. But that's been used and exploited. Our First Amendment right and the protections that we have has been exploited for nefarious purposes. So I can't, while I look at this stuff, I can't give you all of the details on this. Each one would require an individual analysis. I can give you a broad spectrum of the data sets that you're looking at. And I can say, when you are conducting an operation militarily, you're going to have to take control of one area or another area. You're going to have to do things effectively in these areas first. You don't hit certain targets, you shape it, right? So you got to hit those certain targets in a correct order, in the totality of what happens gives you your final outcomes. Right. They've war gamed this thing out. This has actually been gamed out. So your swing states and everything else have been shaped like what Dante mentioned earlier. They've been shaped over a period of time to where they can sell those solutions. And so it's not really, when you look at this, whatever you want to say in terms of the numbers, if the judges are finding this kind of complex, the bigger question I go was, if everybody it was just paper ballots, a pen, right, some sort of marking device, and you have people counting, and you had there's things that are called derivatives, right? So you have an original authentic item. Go to a thing. You got a painting, right? A painting is authentic if it does this, this, and this. They look for these marks and certain signature indicators. If you go to these ballots, there's no real indicators, especially things coming off of a ballot marking device. You don't even know who, it's not, I'm not saying who, but the authenticity of something is because it has authentic signature aspects. It has maker's marks. Mm-hmm. So I know that's sort of that's I'm addressing something that's less than the numbers that you have here, but you have to look for those things. If you don't have the maker's marks, sort of the same thing with a lottery ticket. You get a lottery ticket, they not only have the machine, they know they've got sort of, it's down to the molecular level. They take these things under microscopes, because anybody that's worked for the lottery, there's a lot of people around the world, they'll tell you they've done these massive sales of lottery tickets and stuff. They will authenticate that thing down, and they will lock down all the machines and everything else. So we don't even follow this kind of process, and yet we have people's lives, in fact our entire nation, considering where we're at right now, hangs in the balance because of these kinds of things. So anyway, I'm gonna get off of that soapbox, sorry. But there's make it simple, right? So when you start throwing a lot of numbers, we got to make it simple.
Yeah. I mean, so they go to all this effort to secure the lottery system because there's a lot of money involved in it, but they're not that same amount of effort is given into our election processes. Well, like, why is it just, it's just something that, because there's no central authority over elections, that it's, broken up by the states and they kind of just decide how they want to do it themselves? Or what are your thoughts on, I mean, how do we fix this problem? Like, is the SAVE Act, is that how we fix it? Or is that a start to how we fix it? Or do we need a full, like a centralized authority that ensures elections are paper ballots and so on and so forth, or what?
No. So we did elections before, and it comes down to something very, very simple. It's elections are courts of law that transfer powers from the electors And the people that is, we kind of have this strange thing in especially in the United States, where we have this sort of top down mentality of things, but it actually turns out that the electors are the ones, they're the sovereigns. They're the ones that are in control of the government, and people that we elect that are in office are actually our public servants. And we keep hearing that term, but we're like, okay, so we're the ones in charge. But if we are looking at doing things properly, then we have to say, okay, let's start at the very basics. In that, if you look at, remember back to the initial, some of the stuff, materials that we showed initially with the registration list, the elector management stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that's where you have to start. And you have to say, okay, I can't keep track of who moved into my neighborhood. You know, I got to do that. But that's why we have the voter list. That's why we have these things. So think about it. They're voters until they're authenticated, meaning they could be fresh, they could be new, they could be added to the list, but they become electors once they've been certified that they have been authenticated all the way through. It's like a new person to a unit, a military unit. You don't just
Mm-hmm.
trust them explicitly. You got to go, okay, do you have the right paperwork? Do you have this, that, and the other thing? You check them out, right? You still don't know all of the details, but as you're relying upon those that do know, that, you know, your commanders and other people that are putting them in position, that they would have that kind of authenticity. So then once we go through that kind of process, that's why you have to have voter rolls. If you don't have any kind of voter rolls, if you just let anybody in, what kind of control do you have? There's no controls.
Yeah.
So you have to have voter rolls, and you have to lock in the time. And it's going to sound strange when I looked into the history of this kind of stuff here in Rhode Island. It turns out that you had to be in the domicile for more than 6 months. So you had to live in the state for more than 6 months. This is a historical thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
why would that be the case? Is it shows an allegiance, and this is it sounds like a technical detail, but it's Civil War time period. If you weren't living, you couldn't be called up for war, for defense, because you were part of the militia. So that's actually, it ties it back into a security thing. You had to be present. And if you're not here, you know, for that time period, you're not present, that meant you were willing and able to die for Rhode Island. As you know, so that's what we find in the Civil War, in Virginia, all these other things, same kind of thing, right? That was the division that we saw. So that's kind of a big part of it. And you start with that, and then you start moving forward with, once you have established who is eligible, who are we the people, then you start moving in, okay, how do you transfer those specific powers? There's 4 specific powers that are transferred for authority.
I like it. Cool. Dante, you want to talk about what you were about to?
Yeah, no, I'd just like to just kind of give two examples of you know, from the legal aspects of it. I mean, Chris already nailed the technicalities, and there's no real need to you know, kind of piggyback on that. But you know, I would like to give people just 2 examples of how they were able to control the narrative around litigation in 2020, and you know, just so the level of kind of corruption involved in how some political actors really just, they went all in to protect Smartmatic. So the first example I would like to give people is Smartmatic's lawyer for New York. Smartmatic's lawyer against Giuliani in New York was a guy named Michael Vadas. He worked for Benesh Law, still works there actually. The lawyer for Smartmatic, Michael Vadas, was the founding director of the FBI's National Infrastructure Protection Center. So think about that. I mean, I guess everyone has a price tag, but you know, it kind of just makes you wonder who really is involved to the point where they would have to hire someone like that to represent them in New York. And to the other point too, the defamation lawsuits that Smartmatic and Dominion Voting settled for that $787 million sum. That was in part with a judge out of Delaware named Eric Davis. And what's interesting enough about that is that within that specific court, and again, this is an example of venue shopping, his clerk, Nina Monzak, was actually the daughter of Mel Monzak, who was Biden's former law partner and has held his power of attorney since the 1980s. As a matter of fact, Nina Monzak and her mother, Ann Monzak, were even Biden's staffers. Her mother in the 80s and herself around 2004 to 2006. So think about that headline just for 1 second. When people say that they won the defamation lawsuit, that happened in a court where the clerk is the daughter of the guy who held Joe Biden's power of attorney. So, and again, that's just, one example of many. All the litigation that was thrown out on standing or is moot, or whatever the case may be. There's other certain irregularities too, and one is the fact that Seidel, that company we had just talked about, was in liquidation. There's a document within a regional court in Madrid which shows that Seidel Voting in 2019 was actually in a process of liquidation. Now you fast forward to October 2020, I believe it was October 8th. There's zero activity around Seidel Voting, and all of a sudden, weeks before the election, they're purchased by a company called Service Point Solutions. Service Point Solutions is owned by a company called Paragon, right? Weeks before the election, this tallying company just bam out of nowhere, they get a resurgence, just a lot of funding coming in from this company called Paragon. And what's interesting about that is that the executive suite, even at Paragon at the time, actually had a history with Seidel going all the way back to, from the era of these documents, 2006. As a matter of fact, in 2004, Paragon, the executives at Paragon, Sean Shine and a few others, were in control. They were executives of a company called Accenture, which had developed with Seidel the e-democracy project, as it was called. And this became the basis for a program you and I used, the FMAP. This was a large part of this was based on military absentee voting. And really that was kind of that and HAVA and what happened in 2000 was kind of the genesis. It was kind of like the impetus for wanting to, quote, simplify the process and secure it. But instead, as Chris has pointed out this whole time, all it did was it just made it exponentially more complicated, but in a very schemed manner. So just to kind of point that out there, man, I'll land it there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really good. It's really good points. And that's why I try to stress the importance of critical thinking about everything that you're seeing. Like, don't just take everything at face value, because people they're gonna broad stroke things. They're gonna use fallacious arguments to push their kind of narrative that they want to push. And you really have to actually dig in, like Chris was saying. If you really want to have an educated opinion about what happened with the 2020 election, it would require a lot of time and a lot of effort to do so. And a lot of people are just not willing to put that time and effort into really any kind of research into anything at all. So whether it be something about something that someone's pushing today in the anti-Israel narrative, right? A lot of people aren't going to look up to find out whether or not it's even true. They just see enough people repeating it, and they're going to just be like, oh, well, I guess that is true because these 4 different people all said it and agree with it, so it must be true. And I think that I think that that's one of the big takeaways for everybody is stop being lazy. Your how informed you are about reality is up to you. It's not up to anybody else. Like Dante and Chris and I, and we could have, we could have 10 other experts on this panel, and we could sit here and talk about any topic that we, we're experts in or have expertise in or whatever. But it's really up to you as a viewer and as just someone who is seeking the truth and information to then go in, look into that information objectively, and come back with what your opinion is now based on the analytical thought of that. And I think that that's something that's missing in today's society. I think the way education has changed to a point where now, someone's intelligence is based on their ability to regurgitate information, not analyze and give any critical thought about that information, right? So, I mean, anybody can memorize the articles of the Constitution. Anybody can memorize the Bill of Rights. But if you don't actually look at how and why those words were written and in what context they were written at in that time and for what purpose, then you're not really understanding that information. You're just regurgitating it, and there's no real growth in that. So I kind of agree. You guys agree with that kind of assessment on? I mean, it's a broad stroke of the problems we're seeing today, but I think it kind of goes into every avenue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that kind of segues into, the cultural Marxism and you could even go down the Yuri Bezmenov route, as far as, the intent to degrade socially. But I think at the end of the day, you're right, man. Everyone has a brain. God gave it to us, and he gave it to us for a reason. And that's to use it critically. Don't take anything at face value ever.
I'm perfectly okay with people not agreeing with me as long as they're telling me why. Because that's
Right.
an engaged argument. You want to have a good discussion, and that's actually a good thing. That's really what we're all about in terms of the First Amendment. When you look at things, you don't want to have to resort to the second one because you have a means of going, yeah, let's talk about this, let's discuss this. And there's sort of, we don't want it. The only thing we don't want to see is we don't want to see deception. I think people are going to have different beliefs, and that's okay. And where I stand in all of this is when everything in terms of elections is fully exposed, when everybody understands the process, then it becomes a matter of going, okay, that's something we need to work on. But if we're going to look and say inside of our state houses, inside the federal government, we don't get to see all of the arguments and how the sausage is made. And that to me is a problem. That to me, there should be a lot more visibility of things. But when it comes down to things like votes, the actual votes, those are pretty public. And we get to see those in terms of our state houses. We've seen that in terms of the journals, what they're on the hook for. How come we don't have that same kind of visibility for our own elections from the owners of this whole country, the electors?
Right.
And that's the problem I see. And how we solve that is making that demand by actually getting engaged locally and sort of working that way up and becoming sort of, I don't want to say expert like us, but as engaged as us.
Right.
I mean, Holly's been engaged to the point where she knows a lot about what has been happening in Georgia all around. And I think that civic duty, that kind of civic duty, that awareness is essential. So when people look at somebody, there has to be an accountability, but to make a demand to say, okay, I'm not seeing this, I'm not understanding this, that has to go forward. And when you find problems, they have to be solved. It's just no good to have, we can point things out, we can talk about them, but you're right. The next step is we have to go through the accountability process. And not that I've ever been in combat directly, but I've rolled to the field with full weaponry. And that was the time that happened was when the hostages were taken in Tehran. So that was a full on situation for me at that time, and I kind of understood where things, after I found out what happened,
Right.
where things came from.
And I think that brings up another like good point about a lot of the, and I don't even want to call it analysis. I just want to call it like the opinions a lot of people have about the Iran conflict right now, and how they're one overlooking what they, that they don't know what they don't even know about it, and then they're voicing these very very stringent, very strong opinions on what should or should not happen there, and they're looking at a fraction of the information that is available, because we're not going to know everything, right? The same way we're not going to know what's happening in a criminal investigation, whether it's at the state or federal level, until after that court case is completed. And even then, if it's tied up in appeals processes and things like that, you're not going to know some of that information even for a while after that. For warfare, it's kind of the same concept. We don't know what the decision makers and the CJCS and the higher parts of our military are seeing. We don't know what the intelligence community is seeing, and we don't know what the real big picture actually looks like from a 30,000 foot view, or a strategic level of warfare view. And then people are making these assumptions based off of what a podcaster or someone who touts their background in this or that, but they don't actually know anymore. So when I try to put information out, I go from my experience and kind of how I know things work, but I'm not ever going to sit here and claim that like I know exactly what's going on at the highest levels of our military planning process, because I don't, because all of that's classified and all of that, and if I did know that and then was then talking about it later, like that's a crime and that's wrong too. So I think, to kind of just marry the points together here again, is that everything's happening, and it's on a scale to which we do not necessarily understand it fully. That's why it goes back to having faith in our elections and faith in the system that allows us to elect people, because we're putting those people into the positions that we are then putting faith in them to do what is right and what is best for the United States, for our, for each individual state, and so on and so forth, for the constituents that these people are being voted into power for. People made a conscious effort to get Donald Trump into office because they wanted to see certain changes, and then when changes don't happen exactly as quickly or to the exact dynamic that they expected them to, then they immediately want to jump ship. I can't remember who said that kind of statement. It may have been, I don't remember who it was, but someone said that the American society is a microwave society now. They want to be able to have this gourmet dinner that they can microwave up in a minute and a half and be ready and eat it and be good to go and have that information like that, as opposed to, putting the hours that it would actually take to construct a very elaborate meal, and go through all the different ways that you'd have to prepare things and do everything that way. So I think that's a good way to kind of look at it too.
Yeah. I want to follow on what you're saying right there, though, with regard to when you're doing military operations against an adversary, you definitely don't want the adversary to know all of your plans, right?
Right.
However, when it comes to our elections, you have to have a 100% confidence as you're rolling the numbers up, both from your precinct into your counties, into your states, and then the states into the national. You have to have 100% confidence. So in making that relationship, that's where those kinds of things, the confidence has to start at the lowest level. And then as you roll those numbers together, there should be no confusion. There should be no, how did this happen or whatever. And
Absolutely.
that's critical. That's the way that I look at this thing. And when you look at vulnerabilities in machines, if they can't explain to me every vulnerability, and I'm not going to sit here and blow my own horn or anything. I don't know. And neither do the experts. When I say the experts in machines, people that do the CVEs and look at the actual vulnerabilities every day, people get very creative with what they do. It is insane what happens. And it's like, no, I didn't think about that. And you code systems and you make something as strong as you can. but we update things because we found problems. So if you have
Mhm.
security updates for your computers, our elections are so bad, we got to go right back to ground zero. We got to go back to establishing the very simplest things. So it's not
Yes,
complex. So everybody knows it. And
I
we have
agree.
that confidence, that 100% confidence.
Yeah. No, and I like that viewpoint because again, if you don't have 100% confidence in the systems that lead to the elections from the lowest level all the way up, then yeah, I mean, how do you have confidence that who was then placed in office was who was supposed to be placed in office at the will of the people? So
Correct.
absolutely. I'm gonna let's look at a few questions here, statements, and talk about them real quick. This was yeah, I think I misspoke a little bit earlier. I didn't really mean a centralized authority in the sense that they would run all elections and do that. I kind of meant more a, hey, you know,
In
they
architecture.
put some guidelines on how the elections, you can't use a system that could be compromised, right? Or you can't use a system that is linked to a network that could be compromised. Things like that. Not necessarily a central authority that's like, we are the authority over all elections, but
Your
that's
process
kind
is
of what I was trying to
standardized.
get at.
Yep. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That your process is standardized. When I understood what you meant by that, that you have that this process is standardized, you can have some variations, this versus that, but you're doing things in a way that are not going to allow any kind of infiltration or compromise.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And so that's what I feel needs to be changed. And I do think that needs to be, I mean, the Constitution and then the way amendments can be made, that's not a central authority making those, that would be making those choices either. That would either be a majority of the legislature along with the president, or that would be a convention of states, in which case they would still be agreeing on how to make these changes so that we no longer have some of these vulnerabilities that we're seeing today. Anybody else? Everybody, we're gonna stay on for a few more minutes. If you do have any questions that you want to ask Dante or Chris, they're experts in these areas, so definitely fire away in the chat if you have anything, and we'll bring it up. Let me see if I got anything in here else. Most of it's just hellos, good mornings to everybody that said hello. Thank y'all for being here. Yep. Yeah. What? Yes. Paper ballots. I like the idea. It's simple. We did it for a long time and there was no issues. I don't understand why we can't just go back to it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Florida does paper ballots, correct? Chris, do you know that for sure?
I don't know all the details of every single state. There are so the concept of paper ballots. There's the tabulators. Having paper ballots is one thing, but everybody's using paper ballots. But it's the tabulators that they run them through for counting. So when we talk about paper ballots, maybe that's a misnomer. It's not only the paper ballots, but the entire process is paper based, so that you can't. When you have an original item, notice that sort of make or mark kind of thing. If you have an original thing and you scratch it out or erase it, it's a controlled item. If there's a problem. It's funny when I was working for the lottery company, I was in operations, IGT. When I was in operations, they had samples of what people had attempted to do with lottery tickets. And you had everything from really, really good fakes to horrible fakes, and people tried to redeem all sorts of strange stuff. But that was in based on the state law. That's a problem, right? So if you know these problems, how did you fix them? So that's why they have things. They have micro printing. They have certain indicators inside. So we had a lot of those safeguards, but they were never actually employed. In many cases, they were just shut off.
Right, which is another problem. That
right.
Yeah.
Right. Usage. Right. Usage. Right.
Right. All right. From Redbeard again, we got what are the steps necessary to get only citizens voting, and then making sure only one vote per citizen? I think it's kind of what we've been talking about, right? Making sure that the system there's no or extremely limited vulnerabilities to the system. The SAVE Act having having voter ID and then proof of citizenship. I think those are all very good steps too, so that when you register to vote, you have to show that you are a citizen and allowed to vote, right? And because right now, there's a lot of the states that do ask the question. Generally, it's just a question: are you a U.S. citizen? And you check yes or no, and there's no other verification on that. And as you know, a lot of states you can get an ID with an address, with your address of where you're staying at, and even if you're not a U.S. citizen. So
Right.
I think fixing some of those issues is very important. But I don't. And Chris, you can tell me what you think about this, but I have a hard time seeing the SAVE Act get passed, because I don't see us getting 60 votes in the Senate, and I don't think there's enough. One, I don't even know that all the Republicans would actually vote for it, and then I don't know that there's any way we get seven more Democrats to vote for it as well.
So what you're talking about is the process, right? So what a lot of people do not understand, in which I kind of, again, this thing, government is a self-modifying entity. It changes itself. So when you start looking at that process, when you start looking at what's actually going to happen, it's up to who are we the people, and we the people are responsible for our government. But if you hand everything over, sort of making your point that you were stating earlier, if you hand everything over, then who is in control, and how do they determine we the people? Who opened the borders? Who does this? So it's taking control back where it belongs. It's making people accountable when they're not doing the correct things. But even those processes, the legislative process, if you get in between and you change the constituency and you change their minds, it's got to be some sort of a balance, right? Again, sort of addressing what you had earlier, what you discussed earlier, is that you have to wait until you have the whole picture, right? You can't make a judgment or snap judgment on something. You have to collect the evidence until you've bounded it sufficiently to make a proper judgment. So the same kind of thing goes on with our legislatures. They make decisions right away. They may not have the whole picture. So again, the same kind of thing going on there. But it's interesting that they have a supermajority, right? The 60 votes. You have to know for certain it's not a simple majority. So they're looking at something like that for this case, but in other cases they've played games. So I have all sorts of opinions about 17th Amendment and things like that, and how the states are actually represented in Congress. But if you look at the bigger picture, the states are to keep the federal government in line, and the federal government is to keep the states in line. And that was the design of our republic by the founders, very deliberately, to take and have two different forces that were opposing each other. And so when you have something going wrong with the state, you always have a means of an appeal. If something's going wrong with the federal level, that kind of singular entity, you always had a majority of the states to take and bring them back into line. Yeah, the 17th Amendment is pretty much, you turned what was supposed to be state senators, or senators in U.S. Congress, federal senators, into representatives, because they're being voted by the people and not represented through the state kind of thing. And so you look at that, you go, okay, how many steps removed? Well, if I don't like the process going on with a senator or senators, I should be able to contact both my local rep, my state rep, and my state senator. And then they can pressure the right way. So I have an avenue for control. But if you're elected sort of like the representatives, there's no possibility of getting in touch with people. You just become one in a body of even for Rhode Island, I look at it, we're a small state. Trying to get in touch with my senator doesn't have to hear me. I'm not sufficient enough. So it's a way of building that whole thing of what it builds up. Not voting for secure. What is the upside? Good question.
Yeah. What is the upside for Republicans not voting for secure elections? I mean, there's not an upside for anyone unless You also have to remember some of these Republican senators, especially, there's some representatives there as well, but the senators are a little bit more important from what I would say, at least, is that they're in areas that are more Democrat leaning. They're in areas that their constituents kind of expect them to go against certain things. So for Collins, for example, do we get a much more, I mean, I wouldn't really even call her right leaning, but do we get a right leaning person from up in the Northeast? I don't know. So it's kind of an ambiguous question, but I get where you're coming from. I just don't. I can't really say for sure, because I don't understand why anyone would be against having secure elections. Chris, you got anything to add to that?
No, it's so yeah. I mean, it's you're right. It's an ambiguous question. I like the fact that somebody's thinking opposite. There's an upside for something, but realistically, again, the question that comes down to is why would you personally, if your life is on the line, do you want it to be secure or not? You know, and so I can't find anything right now. It's like you got to just think of it like that, because literally when you have an election, you're making decisions that are going to transfer control over life or death decision making to a representer. Somebody is going to represent that to others. And if they're not following what your desires are, and you get a body of people together and you say, okay, they're representing us, then that's how you get that decision making process, right? But you have people that have opposing viewpoints, and it's okay to hear them. I want to hear that, because like you said, we don't all have that information. We don't have everything. And they may be thinking about something that I haven't heard before. So I really do want to hear their viewpoint, and I want to hear it completely. I want, no holds back, but I don't want information that's bad or poor, or somebody jump to a conclusion. I want to have that confidence, right? So we talk about operating on something that's authentic. And I think one of the things that Dante brought was he brings pieces and elements that are authentic. They're brought with the words from the companies themselves. He goes after the legal foundational documents that you can go, yeah, that's theirs. And you can put it in front of them and go, yeah, that's your company. Let's talk about that. Oh, you did this. I see. Okay. So you're working off of real evidence, and that's the correct way to approach things. But we don't have that with our elections now in any way, shape, or form. Nobody has that confidence. I don't. And I have discussions with my daughter. My daughters both, think where we are right now and everything that's happening, they don't have a lot of confidence. And they ask me a question, and in all sincerity, I go, I don't know. I can't say for certain. We can take different acts, but I can't actually say for certain that our elections are not being manipulated because of these situations. And it can work both ways. And so it's that leeriness that people have, both one side and the other, says that we shouldn't have machines. It shouldn't be based on machines. It should be based on the trusting each other locally and known, and say, oh, I know that particular person or whatever. I know that individual. If we look in our own local precincts, and this is hard to do out in the West, I understand that in some communities, especially when you get into North Dakota and places like that, where people are so spread apart that it's just really hard to understand, see them from day to day. But you get an idea of oh, that's that's this family here, that family there. You eventually get to know people in the area. But if in a fast transitioning metropolitan areas, that's not so easy. So those kinds of things, knowing people in your neighborhood, knowing who's in your precincts, how that breaks down, that it should be doable. Those kinds of steps are actually doable if you lock it in and you have sufficient time to look at things and it's not held back. That doesn't talk about the control issues of managing authentication devices or anything like that. Right? You don't, if you can hand over your passport, say, to somebody, you want to know the person you're handing it over is not going to take it and copy it or play around with it and do things with it. So you have those kinds of issues, but that all of that is what we're actually discussing in the election space, if you will.
Right.
And I would also like to point out too, just play devil's advocate here. I would argue that some writers are probably in on this scheme. You know, some on the Republican side. They're well aware of how the sausage is made. Because let's backtrack here a little bit. Prior to 2020, you know, it wasn't the Republicans or people, you know, MAGA who were trying to bring about, you know, the demise of the machines, but it was largely Democrats. Everyone from Barbara Boxer to Nancy Pelosi to Elizabeth Warren to Kamala Harris. They were all parodying. As a matter of fact, Kanekoa, he made like this 8 minute long video of Democrats complaining about the vulnerabilities of these machines. And yeah, I think it's just it just goes to show the hypocrisy and how the tone has changed post 2020. So
Mm-hmm.
just, you know, the evidence is out there.
Yep. All right, we'll do one more right quick. Redbeard, we're not going to be able to give you a 100% straight answer on this, but Chris can maybe you just talk about the scale of this question. So what is the estimated cost and implementation timeline for applying lottery grade security protocols to federal elections?
Actually, if you go to paper ballots, paper counting, and all that other stuff, very little. You're talking about, you don't have actually any technical aspects of it. Cause of America, they've done an analysis. There's a lot of hand counting efforts being made. Like when you were talking about centralizing something in terms of authority, again, the same kind of thing that you look at, you want to say, okay, if you're going to do hand counting, it should have these kinds of factors in place, these kind of authentication measures in place. So that's what you're standardizing anything. That's kind of what you want to do, but you do it in a general way. I don't need to know the layout. I don't need to know this. Some people prefer counting like this. Other prefers counting like that. But as long as you come up with accurate counts and you have a mechanism for like doing a double, we call it multi-factor authentication. You have more than one way of authenticating something. That's fine. So the estimated cost and implementation for doing those kinds of things, when you say lottery grade or lottery security protocols, let's take that out of the machine type of stuff with the Powerball and having to know the answer and stuff like that. When you are going to cash in your ticket, let's go through the process of saying, how does it add up correctly? If somebody went back, I'm going to tell you right now, all of the investigation that I've been doing on the sort of the Federal Election Commission stuff, all of the donations, if you follow and do work in there, you're going to find nothing is stable. The numbers change all the time. As I was doing my analysis of the election election results coming in, it kept changing. That should never be the case. If you say it's 100% reported, those numbers should not be floating and changing. But they did. And, looking back over a period of time, that right there that's not lottery grade security. There's not even close to it. So right. Those are the kinds of things that we go. If you imagine if your Powerball numbers kept changing, right? Mega Millions or whatever you have for your tickets, that wouldn't work. So again, the same kind of thing. You can take and work through the implementation costs and the timeline. It's not going to be anywhere as complex as trying to put machines in, getting them qualified. What it does require, though, on a personal, individual basis, and imagine this, suppose you did a jury duty type of situation where you didn't know the people that were actually going to be your election judges inside your precincts. And you actually had to do a jury duty thing where they might be brought up by, I don't know, some sort of number system. Something that could be authenticated and done properly, but they would have to prove who they are. And then add this in. Once you have an election, whatever the results are, before you get to the actual counting of ballots, you make sure that the people that are voting are fully authenticated. You're stepping one thing before another. So if you can authenticate all your registration, all of your electors first, That's the real critical factor. So if you think about the currency of elections are actually people, then it's not the ballots, it's the people. And that's kind of what we were showing earlier with the elector management stuff that Dominion did. They see that, they understand that as the equation. It's the people that matter. If you have more people, they literally can manufacture people if they control that point. We don't want that control. We don't want them to be in control. We need to be in control.
Yep. Oh, 100% agree. Cool. Dante, you got anything else you want to add?
No, man. I mean, I think it was pretty concise with it. I mean, I live in a place. Obviously, I'm an expat, so I mean, over here, if you want to vote, you have to be not only have an ID, but you're issued a voter handbook. Like, let's say it's kind of like a passport, and you're issued a precinct where you can vote, and an actual polling station within that precinct where you can vote. And that's issued to you. You can't vote anywhere else. And when you vote, you're stamped. Your booklet is stamped. And at the end of the elections, when the polls close, 9, 10, whenever, they typically have the results within a few hours. So, and it's all paper. So, I mean, it's you're always going to have those who can find vulnerabilities around it, but it's these machines are industrial grade fraud at this point in my estimation. So,
Right.
yeah, hand counts will just exponentially better.
Yep. I agree, man. I agree. Well, guys, thank y'all so much for coming on. Everybody, if you'll give Dante, so his is Dante XXXIIGOD on X, and you got Holly Kessler. It's at Holly Kessler, and then you have at Chris_Arsenal. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. Give them a follow. Experts in lots of different things, and know what's really going on, especially as far as elections are going on. IT stuff. Dante does great OSINT work, and brings a lot of the stuff that I have is because I've been talking to him, and he's like, "Have you seen this?" And then he throws it to me. So give him a lot of credit for all of that, and for always being in on the fight still. So thank you all so much for coming on and giving the insight into what needs to change and how big of a issue this actually is. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us for this near 2 hours, and hope everybody else has a great day.
Chase, thank you for your service, and thank you for the work that you're doing in promoting this.
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
All right, till next time, everybody.